Welcome to Stan Racing Garage. I'm Warner and this is the continuation of our Auto Shop series. Today we're going to be talking about 5 mistakes to avoid when you're starting out working on cars. You don't exactly know what you're doing, you haven't got the feel for it yet. If you avoid these 5 things, it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. Let's get into it. Okay, don't do. Point number 1 is don't ever get under a car that is only supported by a hydraulic floor jack. You always have to have jack stands under the car that are supporting the weight of the vehicle, because when a floor jack fails, it will fail spectacularly. It will let the entire car down all at once. It will not warn you, and that's going to be a bad day for you and your loved ones that have to deal with the aftermath of that. So if you don't have any jack stands, you can use a tire. I highly recommend the jack stands because you're going to let the car down on top of the jack stands. Usually you wouldn't want to let the car down on top of your wheel so that you don't scratch it with the frame of the car or puncture the tire or something like that. It's just there as a safety, as a last resort, if that's the only thing you have. If you do need to use a tire, you can't put it in the middle of the car, because if you jack up the front and put the tire in the middle, when the car comes down, it's just going to teeter over and possibly still crush you. So definitely put it in the area that you're working, the highest part of the car, and then let it down on it if you can. If you can do it without puncturing the tire, it's good. But definitely go out and get yourself a set of jack stands if you don't already have them. If I might interject, maybe a recommended tool purchase, it's definitely going to be a set of jack stands with a floor deck if you don't already have them. So go out and get that taken care of. Mistake to avoid number 2 is loosening nuts or screws with these type of tools. Now, I'll set those down because I can't talk without my hands. A pair of pliers is never going to replace an open-end wrench set, so that's something you're going to have to put on your list to purchase if you don't already have it. You don't have to get all your tools at once, but an open-end wrench set is definitely one of the first items you should have on the list. The only time these type of wrenches really shine, let me show you, is when the nut is quite large, because the big surface area that you takes up for a lot of the slop in the jaws. Same thing goes for the crescent wrench here. If it's a pretty large bolt or nut, these work pretty well without damaging anything, as long as they're not too tight. But generally, when you can fill, the whole area of the crescent wrench, it might work okay. But if it's a smaller bolt, this is definitely going to damage it. And if you don't want your job to be a total nightmare, definitely get an open-end wrench set. Mistake number 3 is driving in a bolt, or say a lug nut for instance, with the gun. So sometimes people will take the bolt or the lug nut, they'll put it right in their impact gun or their screwdriver, and they'll just drive that thing in. Now if it's crossed a little bit, especially with fine threads, this is more of a risk. With coarse threads, it's kind of hard to cross thread a coarse thread. That's a tongue twister, isn't it? But with fine threads, it's really easy, and you just put a bunch of power to it after you threaded it on, and you've probably damaged 4 or 5 threads in the process in just 1 second. So you always, especially with lug nuts, because these are very important fasteners, you always want to get a few turns on it, get a few threads started, and then hit it with the gun and drive it home. You also don't want to take it all the way up to its full torque with the impact, because you can over torque it and damage it. You could stretch the threads even if they're not visibly damaged or broken, and you can fatigue them and cause them to fail in the future if they're over torqued. So you always want to, this gun has a speed setting. It has 1, 2, and 3, not speed setting, but torque setting. It has 1, 2, and 3 on its face where you can set the torque. I usually set it to 1 or 2 when I'm putting lug nuts on, and then I'll put the car on the ground and I'll send it home with a breaker bar, because I have a pretty good idea of how tight the lug nuts need to be. But if you want to be safe, if you're working with a race car or something like that, it's a good idea to use a torque wrench. Now let me show you that. This here is your standard mechanical style torque wrench. They also have a digital style, which is quite nice. It can do beeps or lights, or however you want to do it. However much money you want to spend, that's how many bells and whistles you get with these. But this does the job. It gives an affirmative click action when you've reached your maximum torque setting as set by the handle here, which I'll show you in a minute. I'll see if I can demonstrate it for you too. Let's see. So here is your handle. You can see you have some numbers right here. These are your torque settings. This is an American style torque wrench, so it's going to be in foot-pounds. So you loosen up this locking nut at the bottom, and then that allows you to turn the handle around, and this way as you go up, that increases the torque reading, and as you go down, that decreases it. So let's set it to something low so we can get a click out of it. Let's go. This one only goes down to 10. I wouldn't even trust it at 10. So There we go, I brought it to 20 right there. If you can tell on camera, focus is in right there. Okay, it's set to 20 foot-pounds. I'm locking the bottom nut, and we'll see if we can get a click out of this. Now, keep in mind, usually the higher the torque setting, the louder the click's gonna be, so hopefully you'll be able to hear this, but it's not on the ground right now because I don't have all the tires on, so I can't get it to full torque at the moment. So, see if we can get a click out of it. Not quite. Let's back it off a little bit. I'll show you on one of these bolts, that'll work better. Here we go, 70 foot-pounds on this bolt right here. Should get a nice click. That's how you know you're at the torque rating. Okay, now caution number 4 has to do with your electrical. That's normally the telltale sign of amateur hour on any car, is spaghetti wiring and copper wire that's just folded over itself in electrical tape, or even, I've seen this before, wire nuts. I've seen wire nuts on cars before, sometimes wrapped with electrical tape, sometimes just put in. These are for houses, they're not good for vibration or movement, and that is definitely a fire hazard waiting to happen. So don't use wire nuts, don't insulate with electrical tape, and take your time on your wiring. Use butt connectors and heat shrink, or those solder joints that automatically seal, you know, for a watertight seal. Those things work really good, I like them. And just make sure you set enough time aside for wiring, because you're going to go back to Google a bunch of times to look at the schematic, because the wire you thought was going to work is not going to work, or you might blow a fuse. You know, maybe keep a few fuses on hand for that type of thing that you'll encounter, and just make sure that you give double the time that you think you need for wiring, because it's a lot of going back and forth and a lot of chasing, you know, leads and power and everything like that. And if you rush it, it's going to come out bad, especially when you're a beginner. Now, if you're a beginner and you can make your wiring look professional and neat, it's going to come across as incredible, because that's, like I said, that's the telltale sign of amateurity. Is that even a word? It is now, because I just said it, is spaghetti wiring. So if you can focus when you're doing electrical and take your time and make it look really nice, it's going to go a long way to, you know, improving your reputation as a mechanic. The last point I want to touch on, caution number 5, is pretty simple, and that is to not use tap water in your radiator. There's a bunch of nasty stuff in tap water. There's chlorine and hard minerals and calcium and all that sort of stuff, and it can clog up your radiator. It can clog up your water pump and make it spin slower. It scales and oxidizes the inside of your engine block. So definitely, if you have been using tap water in your radiator, if you've had a leak and you've been adding it periodically, it's probably pretty caked. It's probably time for a flush. And if you haven't, it's a good time to start using distilled water now, only distilled. You don't want to use drinking water or mineral water, because they have, you know, minerals in them, and you don't want minerals in your radiator. You only want pure fresh water. So that's about it for today. Good luck on your mechanical journey, and I'll see you in the next installment of the series.